Good morning and welcome back. We are going to continue with the first chapter of Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry today. One of the things that I noticed when I went back to the video is I actually skipped over something I had intended to share with you. So in the beginning, we were looking at that family tree, and I started to kind of compare a little bit to our novel last year with historical fiction and how it was written on family stories. So I would like to share with you in the beginning of the book, you have to go to the spot that says, there's no page numbers, Mildred Detailer's family. Now, Mildred Detailer is our author, and she shares some information here. I'd like you to read that along with me. So find that in the beginning of your book. I am blessed to come from a family of storytellers, people who repeatedly told the history of our family from the days of slavery into my own childhood years. I am also blessed that my family had photographs of so many of the people who were important to that history. Another blessing was that several generations of my family grew up in the same house, the house my great-grandparents built on their own land in Mississippi at the turn of the 20th century. My father and his brothers and sisters grew up in that house, and although as adults they all moved to the north, each year they took their children back to that house. Back to the family, back to the land. I was one of those children. As a child, I was awed by the giant framed photographs that lined the walls of my great-grandparents' house, and was enthralled as family members talked about all the people in those photographs and told stories about them and themselves. Listening to the stories, I was swept back into another time and felt as if I knew people long since gone. Though the stories and the photographs I could envision my father as a boy or through them. I could envision an aunt and uncles as children. I could envision all the family members about whom the stories were told. As with so many families, my family's history was not limited to our African heritage. Two of my paternal great-great-grandfathers were of European heritage, slave owners in the Deep South. Native Americans were also part of our heritage in both my paternal grandmother's and grandfather's family. One of my great-grandmothers was Native American, but because she died young, her history and culture were mostly lost to the family. However, when my father was a boy growing up in the 1920s and 1930s, Native American family members sometimes came to the land and camped there. And during the 1950s, both my grandparents were asked to sign tribal documents. My family has greatly regretted that we do not know more concerning our Native American heritage. We are, however, fortunate to know much about our African American heritage during and after slavery. And it is this heritage about which I write. Although I have woven my family stories into fiction, I write about the lives of my great-grandparents who were born into slavery, but after slavery acquired land in Mississippi. Paul Edward Logan and Caroline Logan, Big Ma, are drawn from their history. I write about my grandparents. My grandmother was a teacher at the rural community school, and my grandfather for many years worked away from home on the railroad. Mary and David Logan are drawn from them. Two of my great uncles I combined into one. Hammer Logan is based on them. I write about my father, whom became Stacy Logan in the books. And I write about his younger brothers, upon whom I based Christopher John and Little Man. The narrator of the Logan books is Cassie Logan. Cassie is a combination of my beautiful aunt, my beautiful sister, myself, and of course, my imagination. In The Gold Cadillac, another book, the names of the characters are different from those in the Logan books, but the family is the same. Wilbert, my father, Dee, my mother, Wilma, my sister, and I am the narrator, Lois. Also featured in The Gold Cadillac is the Toledo, Ohio house bought by my parents during World War II, and in which aunts and uncles and many cousins lived, along with my parents, my sister, and me for several years after my family's migration to Toledo. The house is also featured in Logan, the concluding book of the Logan saga. I now invite you to meet the Logan family, who is based on my family, and I hope that you will remember them vividly and with affection, as I do. With all best wishes, Mildred D. Taylor, 2016. So unlike the Civil War or the Across Five Aprils book, where there is only one because it's just based on the Civil War and there are no other books, this actually is a series that if you liked this, there are multiple books afterwards that you could read. All right, let's continue with chapter 1. We left off on page 12. I want to remind you too of your chapter questions. We did, I believe, only find one vocabulary word. That was meticulously, and it was right there in the beginning on, I think it was page 2. Just double check. Page 3, we don't even have a page 2, so it's right there on page 3. I went back to look and see if I could find indignation, if we'd skipped over it, and I did not see it yet. So I think it's going to be coming up. I have an idea which scene it's used in. So if we come across it, I will point that out. You should have been able to answer question 1, where are the children going at the beginning of the chapter? Hopefully you figured that out. If not, you'll be able to figure it out as we continue. As they were on their walk to this place that you need to figure out, we meet TJ. So I'd like you to describe who he is and a little bit of his character. And he also talks about the burning, and I'd like you to explain that as well. We've just passed that point, and he talks about how Cassie almost got him in trouble by telling her mother that he had gone up to the Wallace store. And instead of taking the fall, because he did do that, he blamed his brother. And then his brother got a whipping. So that's where we come in, because they're kind of looking at Claude and saying, you let him do that? And then we see Little Man and his opinion about that. So on page 12, right at the top, follow along with me, please. Again, Little Man glanced up, and I could see the dislike for TJ growing. Friendly Christopher John glared at TJ and putting his short arm around Claude's shoulder said, come on, Claude, let's go on ahead. Then he and Claude hurried up the road away from TJ. Stacy, who generally overlooked TJ's underhanded stunts, shook his head. That was dirty. Well, what'd you expect me to do? I couldn't let her think I was going up there because I like to, could I? She'd have killed me. And good riddance, I thought, promising myself that if he ever pulled anything like that on me, I'd knock his block off. We were nearing the second crossroads where deep gullies lined both sides of the road and the dense forest crept to the very edges of high clay-welled banks. Suddenly, Stacy turned. Quick, he cried, off the road. Without another word, all of us but Little Man scrambled up the steep right bank into the forest. Get up here, Little Man, Stacy ordered. But Little Man only gazed at the ragged red bank, sparsely covered with scraggly brown briars, and kept on walking. Come on, do like I say. But I'll get my clothes dirty, protested Little Man. You're going to get them a whole lot dirtier, you stay down there. Look. Little Man turned around and watched, saucer-eyed, as a bus bore down on them, spewing clouds of red dust like a huge yellow dragon breathing fire. Little Man headed toward the bank, but it was too steep. He ran frantically along the road looking for a foothold, and finding one, hopped onto the bank, but not before the bus had sped past, enveloping him in a scarlet haze while laughing white faces pressed against the bus window. Little Man shook a threatening fist into the thick air, then looked dismally down at himself. Well, old Little Man done got his Sunday clothes dirty, TJ laughed as we jumped down from the bank. Angry tears welled up in Little Man's eyes, but he quickly brushed them away before TJ could see them. Aw, shut up, Stacy. Or TJ, Stacy snapped. Yeah, shut up, TJ, I echoed. Come on, man, Stacy said, and next time, do like I tell ya. Little Man hopped down from the bank. How's come they did that, Stacy? Huh? He said, dusting himself off. How's come they didn't even stop for us? So we're getting into question 3. Why did the children get off the road? Well, the bus came barreling down the road, spewing dirt everywhere, didn't slow down, didn't care if the children were in the road or not. And now we're going to find out why the bus didn't even stop for them. Why did they have to walk all the way to school? Because they like to see us run, and it ain't our bus, Stacy said, balling his fists and jamming them tightly into his pockets. Well, where's our bus? Demanded Little Man. We ain't got one. Well, why not? Asked Mama. Stacy replied as a tow-headed boy, barefooted and pale, came running down a forest path toward us. The boy quickly caught up and fell in stride with Stacy and TJ. So I want to point this out. They did, the tow-headed boy. Do you know what that description means? I used to be tow-headed, not anymore. My hair is all dark. But if you've seen my daughter Ruth, whose hair is practically white, or at least it was when she was little, it's starting to get more blonde. That's the expression of tow-headed, is very blonde. So remember, we have this African-American family walking down the street, and all of a sudden this little blonde boy comes running up. Kind of odd, huh? Hey, Stacy, he said shyly. Hey, Jeremy, Stacy said. There was an awkward silence. Y'all just starting school today? Yeah, replied Stacy. I wish ours was just starting, sighed Jeremy. Ours been going since the end of August. Jeremy's eyes were a whitewashed blue, and they seemed to weep when he spoke. Yeah, said Stacy again. Jeremy kicked the dust briskly and looked toward the north. He was a strange boy. Ever since I had begun school, he had walked with us as far as the crossroads in the morning and met us there in the afternoon. He was often ridiculed by the other children at his school and had shown up more than once with red welts on his arms, which Lillian Jean, his older sister, had revealed with satisfaction were the results of his associating with us. Still, Jeremy continued to meet us. When we reached the crossroads, 3 more children, a girl of 12 or 13 and 2 boys, all looking very much like Jeremy, rushed past. So that's hinting that they are all white. The girl was Lillian Jean. Jeremy, come on, she said without a backward glance. And Jeremy, smiling sheepishly, waved a timid goodbye and slowly followed her. We stood in the crossing gazing after them. Jeremy looked back once, but then Lillian Jean yelled shrilly at him and he did not look back again. They were headed for the Jefferson Davis County School, a long white wooden building looming in the distance. Behind the building was a wide sports field around which were scattered rows of tiered gray-looking benches. In front of it were 2 yellow buses, our own tormentor, and one that brought students from the other direction. And loitering students awaited the knell of the morning bell. In the very center of the expansive front lawn, waving red, white, and blue with the emblem of the Confederacy emblazoned in its upper left-hand corner, was the Mississippi flag. Directly below it was the American flag. As Jeremy and his sisters and brothers hurried toward those transposed flags, we turned eastward toward our own school. So this is during the time of segregation, that the blacks went to their own school and the whites went to their own school, and they were not allowed to go together. This is a couple decades before integration. So that doesn't happen anymore. Well, not forcefully anyways. So this is a very different time period. And you notice even the time of when school starts is different. The white children go to school longer. Now, some of you might think, oh, I wish I could have waited to start school, but there's a reason. So I want you to pay attention. That's one of the questions that I took out, but I want you to think about, why does the school start later for the black children versus the white children? All right, let's continue reading. We're right after the break on page 15. The Great Faith Elementary and Secondary School, one of the largest black schools in the county, was a dismal end to an hour's journey. So I walk for a whole hour, consisting of 4 weather-beaten wooden houses on stilts of brick, 320 students, 7 teachers, a principal, a caretaker, and the caretaker's cow, which kept the wide crabgrass lawn sufficiently clipped in spring and summer. The school was located near 3 plantations. So plantations are like the farms, but they're mostly, when we say they're sharecropping, it's cotton. I lost my spot. Turned the wrong page. The largest and closest by far being the Granger plantations. Remember that name from yesterday, Harlan Granger? Most of the students were from families that sharecropped on Granger land, and the others mainly from Montier and Harrison plantation families. Because the students were needed in the fields from early spring when the cotton was planted until after most of the cotton had been picked in the fall. The school adjusted its terms accordingly, beginning in October and dismissing in March. But even so, after today, a number of the older students would not be seen again for a month or two, not until the last puff of cotton had been gleaned from the fields. And eventually, most would drop out of school altogether. Because of this, the classes in the higher grades grew smaller with each passing year. So what is the reason for their school starting later? They need the children to work. They're working the plantation. They are picking the cotton, and the parents can't do it completely on their own. And remember that article we read about sharecropping. It makes it very difficult for them to get out of that situation. They need to do everything they can to bring in the crop so that they can survive. The class buildings, with their backs practically against the forest wall, formed a semicircle facing a small one-room church at the opposite edge of the compound. It was to this church that many of the school students and their parents belonged. As we arrived, the enormous iron bell in the church belfry was ringing vigorously, warning the milling students that only 5 minutes of freedom remained. Little man immediately pushed his way across the lawn to the well. Stacy and TJ, ignoring the rest of us now that they were on the school grounds, wandered off to be with the other 7th grade boys. And Christopher John and Claude rushed to reunite with their classmates of last year. Left alone, I dragged slowly to the building that held the first 4 grades and sat on the bottom step. Plopping my pencils and notebook into the dirt, I propped my elbows on my knees and rested my chin in the palms of my hands. "Hey, Cassie," said Mary Lou Welliver, the principal's daughter, as she flounced by in her new yellow dress. "Hey yourself," I said, scowling so ferociously that she kept on walking. I stared after her a moment, noting that she would have on a new dress. Certainly no one else did. Patches on faded pants and dresses abounded on boys and girls, come so recently from the heat of the cotton fields. Girls stood awkwardly, afraid to sit, and boys pulled restlessly at starched high-button collars. Those students fortunate enough to have shoes hopped from one pinched foot to the other. Tonight, the Sunday clothes would be wrapped in newspaper and hung for Sunday, and the shoes would be packed away to be brought out again only when the weather turned so cold that bare feet could no longer traverse the frozen roads. But for today, we all suffered. On the far side of the lawn, I spied Mo Turner speeding toward the 7th grade class building and wondering at his energy. Mo was one of Stacy's friends. He lived on the Montier plantation, a 3.5-hour walk from the school. Because of the distance, many children from the Montier plantation did not come to Great Faith after they had finished the 4-year school near Smellings Creek. But there were some girls and boys like Mo who made the trek daily, leaving their homes while the sky was black and not returning until all was blackness again. I, for one, was certainly glad that I didn't live that far away. I don't think my feet would have wanted that badly for me to be educated. The chiming of the 2nd bell began. I stood up, dusting my bottom as the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders crowded up the stairs into the hallway. Little man flashed proudly past, his face and hands clean and his black shoes shining again. I glanced down at my own shoes, powdered red, and raising my right foot, rubbed it against the back of my left leg, then reversed the procedure. As the last gong of the bell reverberated across the compound, I swooped up my pencils and notebook and ran inside. A hallway extended from the front of the back door of the building. On either side of the hallway were 2 doorways, both leading into the same large room, which was divided into 2 classrooms by a heavy canvas curtain. The 2nd and 3rd grades were on the left, the first and fourth grades on the right. I hurried to the rear of the building, turned to the right, and slid into a third row bench occupied by Gracie Pearson and Alma Scott. "You can't sit here," objected Gracie. "I'm saving it for Mary Lou." I glanced back at Mary Lou Welliver, depositing her lunch pail on a shelf in the back of the room, and said, "Not anymore, you ain't." Miss Daisy Crocker, yellow and buck-eyed, glared down at me from the middle of the room with a look that said, "So it's you, Cassie Logan." Then she pursed her lips and drew the curtain along the rusted iron rod and tucked it into a wide loop in the back wall. With the curtain drawn back, the first graders gazed quizzically at us. Little man sat by a window, his hands folded, patiently waiting for Miss Crocker to speak. Mary Lou nudged me. "That's my seat, Cassie Logan." "Mary Lou Welliver," Miss Crocker called primly. "Have a seat." "Yes, ma'am," said Mary Lou, eyeing me with a look of pure hate before turning away. Miss Crocker walked stiffly to her desk, which was set on a tiny platform and piled high with bulky objects covered by a tarpaulin. She wrapped the desk with a ruler, although the room was perfectly still, and said, "Welcome, children, to Great Faith Elementary School." Turning slightly so that she stared squarely at the left side of the room, she continued, "To all you fourth graders, it's good to have you in my class. I'll be expecting many good and wonderful things from you." Then, addressing the right side of the room, she said, "And to all my little first grade friends, only starting today on the road to knowledge and education, may your tiny feet find the pathways of learning steady and forever before you." Already bored, I stretched my right arm on the desk and rested my head in an upraised hand. Miss Crocker smiled mechanically, then rapped her desk again. "Now, little ones," she said, still talking to the first grade, "your teacher, Miss Davis, has been held up in Jackson for a few days, so I'll have the pleasure of sprinkling your little minds with the first rays of knowledge." She beamed down upon them as if she expected to be applauded for this bit of news. Then, with a swoop of her large eyes to include the fourth graders, she went on, "Now, since there's only one of me, we shall have to sacrifice for the next few days. We shall work, 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 but we shall have to work like little Christian boys and girls and share, share, share. Now, are we willing to do that?" "Yes, Ms. Crocker," the children chorused, but I remained silent. I never did approve of group responses. Adjusting my head in my hand, I sighed heavily, my mind on the burning of the berries. "Cassie Logan?" I looked up startled. "Cassie Logan." "Yes, ma'am." I jumped up quickly to face Miss Crocker. "Aren't you willing to work and share?" "Yes'm." "Then say so." "Yes'm," I murmured, sliding back into my seat as Mary Lou, Gracie, and Alma giggled. Here it was, only 5 minutes into the school year, and already I was in trouble. By 10 o'clock, Miss Crocker had rearranged our seating beside Gracie and Alma, I was still sitting beside Gracie and Alma, but we had been moved from the third to the first row in front of a small pot-bellied stove. Although being eyeball to eyeball with Miss Crocker was nothing to look forward to, the prospect of being warm once the cold weather set in was nothing to be sneezed at either. So I resolved to make the best of my rather dubious position. Here we go. Let's pause for a second. Dubious is one of our vocabulary words. That was the third one, so you want to mark down that dubious was on page 21. I encourage you to look it up, but I will give you a synonym: doubtful. It's a doubtful situation because if she's right up front, Miss Crocker is going to have her finger on her the whole time, isn't she? All right. Now, Miss Crocker made a startling announcement. This year, we would all have books. Everyone gasped, for most of the students had never handled a book at all besides the family Bible. I admit that even I was somewhat excited. Although Mama had several books, I had never had one of my very own. Now, we're very fortunate to get these readers, Miss Crocker explained, while we eagerly awaited the unveiling. The county superintendent of schools himself brought these books down here for our use, and we must take extra good care of them. She moved toward her desk. So let's all promise that we'll take the best care possible of these new books. She stared down, expecting our response. All right, all together, let's repeat. We promise to take good care of our new books. She looked sharply at me as she spoke. We promise to take care of our new books. Good care of our new books. Sorry, I wasn't looking. Fine. Miss Crocker beamed, then proudly threw back the tarpaulin. Sitting so close to the desk, I could see that the covers of the books, a motley red, were badly worn, and that the gray edges of the pages had been marred by pencils, crayons, and ink. My anticipation at having my own book ebbed to a sinking disappointment. But Miss Crocker continued to beam as she called each fourth grader to her desk and, recording a number in her roll book, handed him or her a book. There's going to be more information, but I want to point out that this is question 4. What is the conditions of the books the children were to receive? So part of it, we can see, obviously they are already used, but use some of these descriptions. For this question, I really would like you to have 2 details, because as it continues, we're going to see even more and learn about the history of these books. As I returned from my trip to her desk, I noticed the first graders anxiously watching the disappearing pile. Miss Crocker must have noticed them too, for as I sat down, she said, "Don't worry, little ones. There are plenty of readers for you too. See there on Miss Davis's desk?" Wide eyes turned to the covered teacher's platform directly in front of them, and an audible sigh of relief swelled in the room. I glanced across at little man, his face lit in eager excitement. I knew that he could not see the soiled covers or the marred pages from where he sat, and even though his penchant for cleanliness was often annoying, I did not like to think of his disappointment when he saw the books as they really were. But there was nothing that I could do about it. So I opened my book to its center and began browsing through the spotted pages. Girls with blonde braids and boys with blue eyes stared up at me. I found a story about a boy and his dog lost in a cave and began reading while Miss Crocker's voice droned on monotonously. Suddenly, I grew conscious of a break in that monotonous tone, and I looked up. Miss Crocker was sitting at Miss Davis's desk, with the first grade book stacked before her, staring fiercely down at little man, who was pushing a book back upon the desk. "What's that you said, Clayton Chester Logan?" she asked. The room became gravely silent. Everyone knew that little man was in big trouble for no one. But no one ever called little man Clayton Chester unless she or he meant serious business. Little man knew this too. His lips parted slightly as he took his hands from the book. He quivered, but he did not take his eyes from Miss Crocker. I said, "May I have another book, please, ma'am?" he squeaked. "That one's dirty." "Dirty?" Miss Crocker echoed, appalled by such temerity. She stood up, gazing down upon little man like a bony giant. But little man raised his head and continued to look into her eyes. "Dirty? And just who do you think you are, Clayton Chester? Here, the county is giving us these wonderful books during these hard times, and you're going to stand there and tell me that the book's too dirty? Now you take that book or you get nothing at all." Little man lowered his eyes and said nothing as he stared at the book. For several moments he stood there, his face barely visible above the desk. Then he turned and looked at the few remaining books and said, and seeming to realize that they were all as badly soiled as the one Miss Crocker had given him, He looked across the room at me. I nodded, and little man, glancing up again at Miss Crocker, slid the book from the edge of the desk, and his back straight and his head up, returned to his seat. Miss Crocker sat down again. Some people around here seem to be giving themselves airs. I'll tolerate no more of that. She scowled. Sharon Lake, come get your book. I think I'm going to pause here because there's quite a bit. I guess we'll have 3 lessons for chapter 1. I'm about to have another class come in, so I'm going to pause this here. I'm not sure how long it is, but we'll have a second video for it, or third video for this. See you later.